and receive satisfaction in doing it the same way every time.
We just don't know.
What's that?
We just don't know.
Right. These are differences in human temperament and have nothing to do with spiritual characteristics. And that's why I'm hopeful that different Urantia societies will develop different techniques. I'd love to see a half a dozen societies in Chicago, one of which at least had stained glass windows. Yeah. And one of which, perhaps, like ours, would be very Spartan, very Quaker-like. Then we could accommodate all varieties of human temperament. And I would get a kick out of going to a very formal society and seeing how they do it, you know. And enjoying being there, and especially enjoying not having to be a member. to be a visitor.
I think it'd be nice if they had that many, that would be the type of something.
Sure. Certainly. I would say, I hope the Urantia movement covers every extreme, from high Episcopal to Quaker. Now there you have the most in the least, to cite the Protestant groups. So we have high church, middle church, and no church, virtually. This to me is desirable.
I think you can be organized without being tough.
Right.
And if you have no type of organization, you're going to be pretty haphazard.
Yeah. You need an organization, formal or informal. The group in Connecticut are very anti-organization, but they work without an organization because we have an informal president and an informal secretary. They have an organization, yes. Happens to be a husband and wife, which is very convenient. Sandy has enough prestige in the community to just be accepted as the natural leader of that group, and his wife, Helena, is very interested in that. So I do business with Sandy and Helena, and they arrange things. Without realizing it, they have an organization. I hope someday they become a society.
That's the one extreme I wouldn't want to go to.
Well, you could always just say, Van, when you woke up, they say, the Spirit speaketh not, and go back to sleep again. You said your line. This is a very touchy subject. Even the words are loaded, as J.B. says. I don't like the word cult, and yet I'm glad that they had the courage to come right out and call it cultism, because that's what it is. And someday we will have these aspects. You know, on a neighboring planet, remember that paper, Life on a Neighboring Planet? Does it strike you as odd that there are no churches at all on that planet? The institution of the church has never evolved. The religious life is centered in the home. There are religious inspectors to check to make sure that what's going on. Their only group activities are in the temples of philosophy. I wonder if churches are characteristic of all cultures, or whether they are peculiar to our culture. We certainly have. Yes. We make much of it.
I bet up on school will be right up at the top. I've heard you. I mean, seriously.
I bet it will.
Oh, you have to ask them to do it. Not wasted. 206. 206. Left on purpose. Well, it's possible, St. Luke is second high in St. in school, in St. Luke's church is second high in the United States. It is, yes, ma'am.
Is that the one that BM took?
Yeah.
Oh, that covers the whole city block. That's a tremendous institution.
Well, have you been out to the church? Well, I met you in the church at Navarro one day.
Yeah.
There was a retired FBI agent came here several years ago, and he's toured the country. And when he came here, he had heard of these two churches. He went to these two churches. He said there's nothing like that in East anywhere.
No, I agree.
And he said that inside and the education
I haven't seen anything like it.
No, they're very
from the
efficient.
school.
We have a couple more churches now. First Presbyterian one is another city block and a half, and then we have a couple more in the project.
These are tremendous.
The St. Luke's Church, and the first Christian, is the second church in membership in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
You know where the first one is? First Baptist in Dallas.
On an area of extent, that First Christian's gonna
40 acres. 41 acres. They just completed their youth center.
Oh, Frank.
Hello, Frank. But that's one attribute that the whole city has.
I was taking a membership size.
Beg pardon?
I was taking my size of membership.
Both things.
As long as we're talking about growth, we're talking about what kind of a cult or cultism will grow up in the Brotherhood. Because the papers assure us that we're going to have one. If we endure, it always develops. And since they tell us you don't plan these things, that they kind of accumulate like hash or family tradition, we've been having a little fun trying to look ahead to see what it might be like. And of course, we don't know. Let's go back and draw another parallel. The Jesus movement operated as a sect within the Commonwealth of Israel at the start. If you believed in Jesus, you were a good Jew. This was a requirement. It observed all the laws of Moses, etc., and so forth. The trouble started when the Greeks arrived. They wanted to believe in Jesus, and they didn't want to be good Jews. Are you with me? Stephen got stoned. They ate pork. They didn't go to the temple. They didn't observe the ritual. They believed in Jesus. And this caused a dislodgement of the Jesus sect from the Commonwealth of Israel and launched it out as an independent body. What are you going to do when there comes a good Mohammedan who says, I want to be a Eurasian, but I am unwilling to be a Christian? You have an exact parallel ahead of you. It's an exact parallel. No, you can't. There is today in Turkey a group who call themselves the Friends of Jesus, and they deny that they're Christians.
What is a Christian?
That would be
Yeah. There are going to be people who are going to be willing to accept this book, but not the Bible. Their background's going to be different. Now, I've had this come up once. I had a Jewish member of the group in Chicago asked me point blank, do I have to be a Christian to believe this? I said, no. And I said, if anyone tells you you do, refer them to me and I will defend you. You can get Jesus direct without going through any other source, old or new. See, the Jew insisted you couldn't have Jesus unless you became a Jew. There's an exact parallel coming upon us. Our Greeks are going to show up someday, and it's going to produce turmoil. You remember the dream that Peter had about eating unclean meat? This created problems, because in the minds of the apostles originally, there was no difference between a Jew, well, you had to be a Jew in order to believe in Jesus. You had to practice accept all their standards, their traditions, and their beliefs. We're going to have our Greek. They're going to come to us with a Buddhist background. They'll be Jews initially, because they're here. But as this book spreads, there will be many who will want to be Urantians without having any Christian affiliation at all.
This would be in the light more of Melchizedek.
Yeah.
You wouldn't. The name Christian attaches Christ's name to it.
That's right.
We could just as much attach Melchizedek's name.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah.
And it had to be I-A-N.
Mm-hmm. Melchizedekian. I think if we take care of our health collectively, we'll live long enough to see the coming of the Greeks. Won't come right away, but they'll come, as they did in the days of peace.
No, I can't.
Sure.
Who will they?
Look, this movement grows up within Protestant Christendom. The overwhelming background of every member of the Urantia Brotherhood is Protestant Christian. That covers roughly 98% of the membership. A couple of dissident Roman Catholics and a couple of liberal Jewish people. That's all. We feel very much at home with each other. We're all Protestant Christians. And we're going to get a jar someday when people with a different cultural background are attracted to the Jesus of the Urantia book. And they're not attracted to the Jesus of Christianity. There's quite a difference between the two. The Jesus of Christianity died for our sins. The Jesus of the Urantia book lived to portray the nature of God to his fellow men. There's a big difference. Christianity emphasizes the death of Christ. This book emphasizes the life of Jesus.
They've been truer religionists without the dogma, without the Christ in it.
Yes. You think about this. It'll happen one day. And we're just as blind to this, Clyde, as the Jews were blind to this, the Jewish followers of Jesus. You see, everyone who believed in Jesus was a Jew, was circumcised, ate unleavened bread on Passover. These are customs. And since everyone was comfortable with each other, they just said, well, it'll always be this way. But then there came the Greeks, and after them the Romans. And someday there will come those who do not have a Protestant Christian background and who want this book. And they'll set up their rituals. I see an exact historic parallel there, Clyde. A Buddhist will look at this book differently. Some parts of this book which are very difficult for us, he will delight in. A Buddhist? Sure he will. He's hungry for God.
After a boy.
Yeah. This book puts Buddha on par with Moses. Respectful Buddhist.
Well, you'll have to get here.
Yeah.
Because he will have to discuss that issue. And that's going to be that's a terrible trip for a so-called Protestant Christian.
Yes, it is.
That's a pretty rough trip right there.
But it may,
You give that trip to a Buddhist, he's liable to tell the whole book.
No, he's apt to have an easier time. This runs too closely parallel to the Christian tradition. The Jesus of this book will come as something completely refreshingly new to a Buddhist, painfully familiar to a Christian.
Well, the absolute not the
The Buddhist believes the absolute without mayonnaise. He's used to those concepts. Yeah. Sola Hindu. Some of these concepts, which are very foreign to our theology, certain non-Christian theologies will cope with very easily. The concept of many ages.
The concept of framed in.
That's what I was going to say, an experiential, unitizing being. See, that's a new concept altogether. At least I never heard of it before.
No, they will have difficulty. Some of them will have difficulty with God the Father, but not with the Absolute. We have an easier time with God the Father. We have our problems with the Absolute, experiential deity. It's purely a matter of what is your theological background. And some of these non-Christian theologies are very intriguing and not wholly without truth. A Buddhist, a northern Buddhist, is not without a God concept. He has a concept of God. And it's a pretty rough one for the Christians to compete with, too. I heard Kagawa talk one time. And he said, don't send theologians to Japan. He said, the Buddhists have got everything we've got except Christ. Well, the Buddhist God is a God of mercy. He's a God of love. He listens to the prayers of the worthwhile and answers them. That's not a bad God concept, is it? So someday our Greeks will come. And I hope when they come, I hope they find 1,000 Urantia societies that have 992 different ways of doing it. It'll stimulate them to work out their own original temperament-satisfying rituals and customs, which will be quite different from ours. You see, I regard Buddhism as just as good a background for the life of Jesus as Judaism is. The teachings of Jesus ride piggyback on the Old Testament. I think the teachings of Jesus could ride piggyback on the teachings of Buddha just as well. I hope that doesn't shock you, does it? Don't let it too much. You see where the successors of the apostles missed the boat. They should have gone east as well as west. And about 2 generations after the times of Jesus, a new form of Buddhism was arising in Asia. And they should have been there to attach Jesus' teachings to that, and it would have been a marvelous vehicle to have carried it all over Asia. It could have, Jesus' gospel could have ridden Buddhism in Asia just as nicely as it rode Judaism in the Occident. Because this was the Buddhism which evolved a God concept, a real concept of God. I'll tell you my favorite story of the Protestant missionary in Pekin back about 1910, who was visiting a Buddhist monastery in the environment. And it was a lovely old place. You know, when you take care of the lawns for 300-400 years, they get pretty velvety. And the architecture was mellow, and the missionary was expressing his appreciation of the beauty of the place, and the abbot was just overjoyed. Here's a colleague, that appreciates what we have. As they passed the central sanctuary, the abbot was kind of carried away. And he said to the Protestant missionary, he said, would you like to stop in and burn a little incense to the Buddha? And the missionary says, my good man, he says, you don't understand. He says, you and I, we worship different gods. The abbot thought a minute, and he said, well, how can this be? There is only one God. And I say, at that moment, the abbot was closer to the truth than the missionary, because there isn't. And the abbot knew it. You can't worship different gods if you really worship. Because the name you give to God is not important, because he's never revealed himself by name. The abbot worships Amitabha. The missionary worships God. The Old Testament calls him El Shaddai, El Elyon, Adonai, El, Elohim, Eloah, Yahweh. How many different names are there for God in the Old Testament? Now these are conventionally translated, the Lord, the Almighty, the Supreme, and so on. But there were many names for God, which the Jews had. And all of them have a little different connotation. So whether you call him Amitabha, or Allah, or God, or Father, what are the names? There's a jillion of them. We're talking about the same thing.
Madam President,
You're hitting awful close.
3 minutes.
I can't hear. I don't know.
yeah, well, that was before there in the last war, LLA. That's where Rommel. Yeah.
Yes, I know. Yes.
That was Anderson, Rommel Trek, wasn't
Yes, I know. I don't know what the word El-Alamein means, though.
I just thought it was the Egyptian name.
Yes.
This is the only, design and architecture is no problem with countries. This is,
Yes.
in design and architecture.
I thought a lot.
I should say,
I thought a lot about the construction of this book. You could write this book and leave all mention of the absolute South. You leave the supremely ultimate out. But I don't think this book is written to appeal exclusively to the Christian mind. This book is written for all men. It's designed to appeal to the non-Christian mind as well as the Christian mind. This is designed to have a universal appeal. Because God is no respecter of persons. And I don't think he loves a Christian any more than he loves a non-Christian. He couldn't. He just couldn't. But they're all his children. And I think they baited their hooks with varied bait to appeal to many different types of theologies, temperaments, and laws. And I think that's why some of this book is a little hard for us to understand. It's foreign. It's not in our theology. We have to cut some brand new grooves here. Yes.
Well, when I, the mansion world, that would show up again. That some would show up up there.
Yes, well, you'll have
I'm not bothered about it. You can just beat me up there.
I would like so much to come back 500 years from now and see what's happened to this.
I'll tell you about it when I go.
All right. You're going to see, you're going to tarry.
Where did it go?
You see, Jesus tried to avoid ritual. His parents insisted that he say the ritual prayers, and he conformed. Then afterwards, he insisted on having a little talk with his Father in heaven. He tried to get his brothers and sisters to do this. They didn't buy very well, and so he kept prompting them. And eventually, they took these promptings and put them together into Our Father who is in heaven. This is a compilation of Jesus' prompting, and he never intended to make that a prayer, which is probably why it's such a good one. When he never volunteered to teach that prayer, but he finally gave in when the 12 simply kept after him and wouldn't give up. But Master, they asked us how do we pray? You've got to give us something. And finally he broke down and he said, all right, I will give you the prayer, which eventually my brothers and sisters prayed in Nazareth. And that's the origin of the Lord's Prayer. He gave it reluctantly. But now, do you see the pressure for ritual that builds up? Jesus never voluntarily created ritual, but he reluctantly acquiesced to the persistent demand for ritual. When the first you might call it pre-Christian legislature met, it was the 12 apostles of Jesus and the 12 apostles of John the Baptist. He gave them a couple little talks about tolerance and empathy and the spirit of give and take. And then what did he do? He took off. He wouldn't sanction that meeting by his presence. He said, because this is human legislation. He merely said, whatever you agree to do, I will abide by. He let men pass the laws which govern men. He came back and he listened and he said, fine, these are your decisions, this is the way we'll do it. Because I don't think he much cared. Whether the river bank was cut here or cut here, he wanted some banks cut so we could have a river. He's interested in the river, not the banks. Now, what do you suppose it'll be like 500 years from now?
Well, we're progressing. One thing which will help worldwide problem is the open hot hurricane.
Yes?
This is integrated.
This, I think, is designed to provide a foundation for universal brotherhood.
This is pretty close.
Yes,
And this can only help.
that's right.
We'll put people back to work, earning an honest $2.10 an hour.
Idealistic.
Dale?
Yes.
That little piece of paper still fully defined? Certainly doesn't mean unless you had his little intelligence.
A Jeffersonian believes in the great commandment to love God with everything he has and serve his neighbor as himself. A Christian is a person who believes his union with Christ is through the church, and that he survives by virtue of Christ's sacrifice, which reopens the way for man into the Father's heart. That's pretty good. You see, there's nothing about Christ in the gospel. You mean they're coming for you?
Don't know if her eyes, but her eyes are on like you can. Hours from now. It doesn't. The elegance of her eyes.
Now, Jesus' gospel is the quintessence of simplicity. as it comes to my lips, it's simply this. God is the Father of each man, which makes men brothers, and they should act accordingly. It's just three phrases put together. Now what's happened to that is a caution to cats.
Or otherwise.
Sure. And I would rate the Christian gospel as the second best gospel that man has ever heard. And the only better one is the one that Jesus personally taught. It's a beautiful gospel, the Christian gospel. It's inspiring, it's ennobling, but it's also a defamation on the character of God. I mean, what kind of a father is this who gets mad? And he has to be propitiated in such a wise. I mean, that's a frightening sort of a God, because he might get mad again. And then where are we? Sir? What's another word for God? What? Yes. What's the name for God in the Sikh religion, do you know? Yeah. I can remember the name for their Bible, the Granth Sahib, but I can't remember their name for God.
Is that the latest religion?
It's an Asian contemporary with Protestantism. Grew up in, it's a Mohammedan effort to take the best out of Hinduism and join it to the monotheism of Muhammad. If you look at these other religions in an uncritical way, you're not looking for their worst, because Lord help you, they can catch you off base with the worst in the Bible too. There's some awful stuff in the Old Testament. But let's take a concept, for example, out of Buddhism, like karma. Karma is nothing but a word which says you have to work out your unfinished business. Now, the way they apply it, I don't agree with it. But the principle is sound. When you wake up on the first mansion world, if I were talking to a Buddhist, I would say on the first mansion world you begin to work out your karma. And he would know what I meant. Which is to say, all of your deficiencies and inadequacies and the animalism in your nature, you've got to cope with. You're still ease-seeking, problem avoiding, procrastinating, and so forth. These are lessons you have to learn up there. And the Buddhist would catch that. And he would say, this makes sense. Now, of course, where he would have his great shock is, if he's a fundamentalist Buddhist, Southern Buddhist, his definition of heaven is our definition of hell. He expects to unite with the absolute as a drop of water unites with the ocean. And this is exactly the way they describe the fate of the personality of a non-survivor. So his big problem would be, how do you become more real and closer to God without being absorbed by God? This would be a tremendous hurdle for him to take in his theology. And the concept of personality in this book would bug him. The thought adjuster concept, he'd understand. So would a Hindu. He'd say, well, this is the Atman. This is that part of the absolute which is in each man. Correct. But it's not, it seeks for cohesion, but not for unification. in the sense of being absorbed back into the absolute. The Atman concept in Hinduism is very close to the adjuster concept presented here. And as you study these religions, you see facets of truth all over. Very intriguing. He'd understand that. Although, of course, actually what you have, Chuck, is either karma, good karma is no karma in Buddhism. If it's good karma, you don't have it. It's the bad karma that you're working out. And when eventually you have no karma, then you achieve nirvana. Yeah. Good karma, I think, is no karma. Gautama Siddhartha? Gautama Siddhartha. Gautama Siddhartha. It's, sometimes it's spelled Gautama. There's different spellings for these people. Yes, I'm sure there are.
On the same page, by the same readers.
Page 44, paragraph 3. The ability, paragraph 3, creatorship is hardly an attribute of God. It is rather the aggregate of his acting nature. And this universal function of creatorship is eternally manifested as it is conditioned and controlled by all the coordinated attributes of the infinite and divine reality of the first source and center. We sincerely doubt whether any one characteristic of the divine nature can be regarded as being antecedent to the others. But if such were the case, then the creatorship nature of deity would take precedence over all other natures, activities, and attributes. And the creatorship of deity culminates in the universal truth of the fatherhood of God. I think that statement means this. Since this is the first source and center, I merely want to use that word to emphasize the word first. Since this is the original source and center, all things proceed from God. And did he not take the initiative, nothing would happen. Nothing would have happened. I think they're using the word creatorship here in a very large sense, much larger than the technical use of the word create. The word create, technically used in these papers, is sub-absolute in function. That is to say, well, put it this way, Havona never was created. The first beings to be created probably were the seven master spirits. Prior to the seven master spirits, it's an eternal existence. It is pre-creating. Now the other end of the word create is the function of the ultimate. Says the Blue Book. Concerning God the ultimate, they take inventory of a lot of characteristics and then point out that all of these qualities of the ultimate are coordinated on final creative levels of God the absolute, in the next paragraph, they point out this is super creative. So we can bound the limits of creativity, and we can say it's got an inner and an outer limit. Its inner limit is its post havona. Its outer limit is it stops with the ultimate. So creativity, used technically, is a sub-absolute method of bringing beings into existence. It's got bounds. Now, as the word is used in paragraph 3 on page 44, I don't think it's used within those limits. I think they're discussing here everything that God does. And if you'll recall, on page 333, I think it is, I've cited this reference so many times, I think I know the page number. You know, page 333, paragraph 7. God as a superperson eventuates. God as a person creates. God as a pre-person fragments. God can also trinitize, as he did with the Son in producing the infinite Spirit. God has varied and different ways of bringing things into being. And some of these ways are super creative. But I think here, where they say this is not an attribute of God, this is the sum total of his acting nature, what they're saying to us is, God is an initiator. He is the prime cause. And as prime cause, this is what he's up to all the time. He's stirring things up. He's getting things started. And I don't accept the word creative here in its narrower technical usage. I think this refers to fragmentation, creation, eventuation, trinitization, deitization, eternalization, are some other words that they use that they don't define. I would say when God deitizes something, this might be a super creative act. When he eternalizes something, this might be a super creative act. Question.
Is it correct? Now, using that word, God to eternalize, the Son, concomitant, with
Yes.
eternalize.
Yes.
Is that the right verse?
Yes.
Yes.
I would call the, in a certain sense, I think of the Son in paradise as being divestments of God.
Yes. And they're
He separated himself. Yes, he separated himself from those two.
But that would, to be an eternalized
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
Manifestation
Yes.
of God.
And the word eternalized is fit there, I think. I think you've got to allow the authors of the papers license in their word usage. They are both technical and broad in their usage of words. And I try to go by the context, and I try to use horse sense. And to me, the word create here means anything which God does which makes a change. In that sense, in this usage, he created the Son. In the technical usage, no, he eternalized the Son, or he divested himself of the absolute personality which then became the Son. That's a more technical usage. But again, if you're going to be technical, you take all the euphony out of the papers. The Paradise Trinity of Father, Son, and Spirit is a beautiful statement, and it's technically incorrect. The Paradise Trinity of the deity of the Father, of the deity of the Son, and of the deity of the Spirit. Now we're being sea lawyers. And we have been very technical and very precise, and all the poetry's gone out of the text. We should understand that when we read this. This is a loose usage, a loose description of the Paradise Trinity. Does that make sense to you, Bert? Does it answer your question?
different points of view, or what? But those two things are used very loosely.
I'll tell you what.
What? But those two things are used very loosely.
I'll tell you what.
Of course, we know who they're talking about.
Let's take our words for God. Let's go from the smallest to the largest. The smallest designation of God to me is Father. Because this is a name which is applied to a relationship which God has to his creatures, his sons. This ignores God's relationship to universes, to the absolute, to anything except personal creatures. That's the smallest word for God, and by far the most meaningful, because the word Father has a real deity of the universal Father, the deity of the first source and center, the first person of deity. We're getting something a little larger. Now we're considering God's aspect, which includes personality, which includes other things. Example is pre-personality, which he fragmented. A thought adjuster is not a fragment of the personality of God. You can't fragment personality. A thought adjuster is a fragment of the pre-personal nature of God. I don't know how to worship the pre-personal nature of God. I only know how to worship the personality of the universal Father. I worship God. But I recognize that God has a pre-personal nature and a super-personal nature, and they're quite beyond my ken. But they're all a part of the deity of the universal Father. First source and center is the largest designation. To me, this includes non-deity aspects. Paradise is a revelation of the first source and center, but paradise is not a revelation of God. The eternal Son and paradise are dual revelations of the first source and center. The Son being a revelation of his spiritual and personal nature. Paradise being a revelation of his non-spiritual, non-personal nature. And the minute you accept that, then you realize there's a lot more to the first source and center than we realize. The first source and center is not less than personal. The universal Father is the personality of the first source and center. But there's an awful lot in the first source and center that's other than personal, other than spiritual, other than deity. Because everything comes from it. That is the biggest word of all. I suspect one more thing. The first source and center is the infinite, as the infinite is manifest on the level of the absolute.
That's for Kurt Burke, and I like that thing. We speak, Bill, of the Son and the Spirit in it. They share infinity with the Father.
Correct. Correct.
He's the infinite one.
Yes. But on the level of absoluteness, he shares his eternity with six other beings, six other realities.
I didn't quite get the sequence. The deity of God comes next in line after first source and center.
Between first source and center and God.
That's all I
No. Now let's get that right.
Going up the line.
That's everything.
Yeah.
The first one.
Father, God, deity, first source and center. These to me are expanding connotations of the Father. The narrowest word for God is Father. The biggest is first source and center. The infinite is a projection which we make. And we can't validate it, in fact. But we all know it must be there. And so do the authors of the paper. But they can't go beyond the first source and center. Now the first source and center share infinity, different aspects of infinity, and absolute, with 6 other realities, entities, beings, 2 of whom are persons, 2 more of whom are deity but not person, and 2 of which are neither deity nor person. Right. There are 7 absolutes. 3 of them are persons. 5 of them are deity. 2 of them are not deity. Paradise and the unqualified absolute.
I'll never forget the day I asked you the question. Why is the universe absolute considered deity outside the reason that the paper stipulates? It's a tough one. What explanation was very good. I don't know whether I got it or not.
Thank you. I hope I remember to never ask it again. When you think of the first source and center, I want to be very crude now. Let's think of the United States of America, because I want to make a geographic analogy. We get 50 states. In the first source and center, we encompass all 50 states. When we move down to the level of deity, we exclude, let's say, 35 states. They're non-deity. When we move to the level of God, we exclude another 35 or 40 states. Yeah. And when we move down to the level of Father, we exclude some more states. That's an aspect of God. Take some numbers. Now let's take the second source and center. We got 50 states. And they're all deity. And they're all personality. And they're all the attitude of a son and a co-father to creatures. We don't exclude anything. See the tremendous difference there? And this is why you're never going to understand the universal Father until you understand the Son. And this is why the only avenue to the Father is through the Son. Because it's in the Son that you see the first source and center uncomplicated as wholly personal, wholly deity, wholly spiritual. The Spirit is just like the Father. He's personal, but he's everything else besides. And as you go down the line, gee whiz, your states classified in different areas. When he bestows his Spirit in a way that's analogous to the bestowal of a thought adjuster, he fragments his pre-mind Spirit. Pre-mind, the conjoined actor is very much like the Son. But then you encounter the origin of mind here. He's not only the final source of all ministering spirits, he's also the final source of all the power directors. That's a switch. All the physical controllers stem from the third source of center. I visualize it this way. You start up here, the pyramid, and there are two lines that go out. The sun and paradise. They're twin expressions of the first source of things. And their kinship is disclosed in the identity of their energy emanation. The material, the non-spiritual energy of paradise is indistinguishable from the spiritual energy of the eternal sun. You can't tell one from the other. And the only way you can distinguish one from the other is you got to know where it came from. So you use a different name. Not indicative of a difference in nature, but indicative of a difference in source. Now, from there on out, the thing diverges. But there's a crossbar that goes across here. That's the conjoint actor. Everything converges in the first source and center. But everything is functionally related to the third source and center. The conjoint actor deals with things after the divergence, but builds a functional bridge right across matter, mind, and spirit.
You think, Bill, that the power, strength, and the material is the same as the spiritual?
The energy on Earth?
If they would, if we put an ammeter,
Yeah, I think it's just exactly
it has
right.
to be, wouldn't it? They're divided.
Sure. They both come from the same source. You can't tell one from the other, except you use a different name, if you know the source. If we plug it in one place, we call it Monota. If we plug in elsewhere, we say this is the spirit emanation of the eternal sun. Will we get the same amp reading, the same volt reading on the same meter? This is why, in many ways, the third source and center is much more like the first source and center than either are like the second source and center. The third source and center functionally cuts right across all levels of reality, matter, mind, and spirit. The first source and center is before these levels of reality. What's a thought adjuster? It registers on us as a spiritual entity. How come it travels the gravity circuits of paradise? Because it's pre-spirit. It is a part of pure energy. It's a part of something which is like Monota, and like the spirit of the sun, because it is a fragment of the Father, which is before paradise and before the sun. This thought adjuster is pure energy. In our experience, spirit energy. That's how we interpret it, because that is our route toward reality. And in the present universe age, ministers to us only spiritually. But there's an interesting suggestion in the papers that in the next universe age we may sustain other relationships with thought adjusters. Additionally. See, we think of mind as occupying a mid-position between energy and spirit. But how can mind occupy a mid-position until these two have diverged? And at the level of paradise and the eternal sun, there's no divergence that can be detected. When you get to Havona, yeah, you get a divergence. Perfect synchrony. But there's no question about the spirit nature of a spiritual being in Havona and the triada of a Havona world. This won't, we've got to have different ammeter voltages to register. But still perfect synchrony. Then you come out here into time and space. You've got a hell of a divergence, and you don't have thinking. And there's the big problem. In time and space, energy matter is dominant, except in personality, where spirit, through the mediation of mind, is striving for the mastery. And there is the problem which God has set for all of us. From the Supreme Being right smack on down to mortal man. That's the survival problem. And the evolutionary problem. The power of personality synthesis problem. Sure. It's just stated very simply.
That was a terrible phrase, actually.
Yeah. Now we're
Weren't they all under the Orban
Yeah,
Orbantan Commission of what, 12?
there's 24 in the Arbantan Commission,
were
12 in the Nebadon Commission.
Yeah.
And then there were 12 midwives under the presidency of Mantusha Melchizedek.
That button first.
So you got less than 50.
Functioning through that could be more.
Yeah.
Push it over 100 or...
I don't know. I don't know. We don't know how many mighty messages participate because they don't name themselves. Are we on?
We're in business again.
Repeating that statement. In time and space, energy matter is dominant, save in personality, where spirit, through the mediation of mind, is striving for the mastery. Let's break it down. That's what you want, isn't it? Out here in time and space, the organization of energy comes first. Nebulae are created, or are mobilized, long before any spiritual creation takes place. Energy matter is given a head start. This is true even in human life. The physical life is extremely real. Now, spirit is striving for the mastery of the whole ball of wax. Spirit has no effect on energy. It doesn't reach, it doesn't touch. Mind can whip energy in the long run. In personality, you have a situation where the personal creature can make a choice to subordinate to spirit leading that mind which can dominate material energy. And this creates a stabilized survival pattern. Let's apply that to our world. Man's mind is relatively dominant over matter through science. As we unlock the secrets of nature, man becomes an increasingly dominating force on the planet. Our minds in this generation have unlocked atomic energy. But we have not chosen to subordinate these minds to spiritual leading. And because we have not, we are greatly afraid, are we not? The only stable society that can ever be devised will have to follow this formula. Let's say that the Russians had been the first to unlock atomic energy. And let's say that the Russians, their form of society is different than ours, but theirs is a deeply religious society, this hypothetical Russia. It is a humanitarian society. It is a society which is notable for its good works on earth. for its great devotion to religion. I don't think we'd be afraid of the fact that they had atomic energy. Would we? The whole question is, can you have restraint of power? Mind, hard-working mind, results in power because mind does dominate matter. It invents gunpowder. It invents various pre-gunpowder techniques of power, such as swords, spears, armor, castles, catapults. Mind produces engines of power, machines of power, devices of power. Mind eventually produces a science, which is power. How is this power going to be used? What is the restraint on the utilization of power? Consider Assyria. Consider Prussia. When power is not restrained, then power begets fear every time. And fear begets opposition. Opposition begets coalitions, confederacies, who eventually bring down that which is feared. But if you could have power without producing fear, if mind were subordinated to spirit leading, so that power was harnessed to truth, beauty, and goodness, dominated by love, mercy, and ministry, then who's afraid of a powerful guy? Who in his right mind is afraid of God? Now contrast God with Joe Stalin, just to go from the sublime to the horrible, or Adolf Hitler. They had power too, in the human sense of the word. Both very powerful men, both men which engendered great fear in the world. Jesus had power, but who was afraid of him? No sane person would be afraid of Jesus. And yet you stop and think, right on the evening of his arrest, he was the most powerful human being on earth. He could have really unleashed power had he wanted to. What restrained him? Spirit leading. As he put it in words when he was a teenager, before he knew really who he was, up on the hill north of Nazareth, he was praying. And he said to his father, he said, I'm not too certain about my background. But he says, there's one thing that's very clear to me. I have always been subject to your will. As it says in the Morantia, in the philosophic illustrations of Morantia Mota, to have power and steadily refuse to use it purely for personal self-aggrandizement. This is the mark of a high civilization. That's what this power personality synthesis is all about, I think. This is going on the human level. Consider the test that Michael went through just before the trial. In that god-awful hour when he was subjected to the insults of the servants of the high priest, when they spit on him, when they hit him. Now listen, this is a human being with adrenal glands. And he's the creator of this universe. Consider the restraint that he exercised. There was a test. Now you and I go through that, we have no choice. We've got to take it. He didn't have to take it. He chose to take it. That was a real test. Yes.
Do we know from the picture what the cosmic problem will be that you have just not given for our time? Your transcendent will. What will be God's cosmic problem then for the deities and the entities?
It'll still be power personality synthesis.
Sir?
It'll still be power personality synthesis, but it'll be, how do you do this without finite experience? God sets his problems by subtraction. First he projects Savona, then the superuniverses. And from the superuniverses he subtracts perfection. And sets up a challenge to everyone in Havona, in paradise. Yeah, the whole Kishmir. What are you going to do about it? Do something. And so they come out here, and they grow in the process. In the outer space levels, he's going to make his second subtraction. No more finite experience. Now, do something about this. Now, I can't visualize an outer spacer, and it's hopeless to try to do this. Here. How would you explain a mortal ascender to a Havona native who had never seen a mortal ascender? This is before Grand Fanda got there. In other words, you're a Havona native who's been out in time and space. You've seen these local universes, but the first ascenders haven't got to Havona yet. And you're back on leave from foreign duty. And you're trying to tell me about these critters out here. And you're trying to explain to me a creature who doesn't always choose to do right when it's completely outside my experience, my frame of reference, my capacity for thought. You can't explain this to me. Any more than you can explain the color red to a man who has never seen it. You might get a certain abstract concept across to me, but not the flavor of evil with which all time and space is fragrant. And we can't understand an outer spacer. We'll understand him when we see him.
But his problem will still be power, personality.
Yes. Yes, it will. That's the problem of God the Ultimate. That's the problem of God the Absolute. It's an ascending problem, encompassing a tremendous scope.
So, to say that there will never be a closed job is equivalent of saying there never will be a perfect power personality.
There will never be an infinite power personality synthesis of an experiential nature. Because you'd have to exhaust infinity to do this.
Almost, but not quite.
We'll achieve it qualitatively, I think. The power personality synthesis will start and continue on the absolute level, but will never be consummated. If you will do this, you'll help yourself. Associate the word absolute with the word quality. Associate the word infinity with the word quantity. And you'll cope with these far distant things better. I can see the attainment of absolute quality of experience, which is sub-infinite in quantity or universality. Are you with me? I cannot breathe all the air on this planet, but this does not mean I cannot breathe any air. And my limitations, the limitations of my lungs as to quantity of air inhaled, has nothing to do with the fact that the air which I inhale is not real air, typical air. I have no quality limitation, just a quantitative limitation. I think eventually we will know God as absolute from a qualitative standpoint. And we will forever grow in our quantitative comprehension of him as absolute, but we will never know all of God as absolute. This is a growing experience. Check.
Within the framework of the cosmos infinite, can you see, to facilitate just what you said, can you see a finite number of home bases to work from in seeking that attainment?
Yes. Finite at any given moment in time, but not
Talking about
finite.
physical basis.
Yes, but not finite in eternity. Now look, let me see if I can get this idea across to you. Let's say that we have a growing universe. And I'm going to symbolize this growth by the number of physical space bodies. And let's keep the numbers small. These are symbolic numbers now. Each one of these numbers stands for a gazillion. All right. Today, we have 10. Tomorrow, there's 12. The day after tomorrow, there's 14. And this goes on. I don't have to say any more. At any given moment in time, there is a finite number, is there not? But is there a finite limit? No. Because the day after that, there'll be 2 more. The day after that, there'll be 2 more. You have a limit in time, but not in eternity. Because in eternity, you're trying to think of all the tomorrows, of the infinite number of tomorrows. And of course, if you keep adding 2 every day, you have an infinite number when you take all limits off. Are you with me now?
As to the not as to the theory, as to the necessity. I'm totally both as to the necessity.
All right.
And God, you said yesterday, don't do things indiscriminately without reason.
Clyde, look, a part of our problem is we're trying to conceive of something infinite. And whether we're dealing with facts or concepts, I don't know. But I'm trying to probe with a very poor tool up here, a human mind. I'm trying to probe about as far away as the human mind can reach. I'm saying this. Let's consider space now. Let's say that we have an expanding space, always moving out. At any given moment, it's got a limit. But tomorrow the limit won't be there, will it? It has a limit only in time. In eternity, it's infinite. Now let me read you something from the forward.
But what's hiding there? That God knows all things, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, from the beginning to the end.
Yes.
He is the only one.
Is there a finite number?
Now listen. Always remember, I'm going to read you the same thing I've been saying. Always remember, potential infinity is absolute and inseparable from eternity. You can't have infinity except in eternity. Actual infinity in time, we're considering where we are at any given moment now, can never be anything but partial and must therefore be non-absolute. If you ask, where is the boundary of space? They say, when do you want to know? You say, in eternity. Has no bounds. Oh, but now, oh yes, it's so many light years out there. There's a boundary. You say, wait a minute, the answer is inconsistent. They said, oh no. Because tomorrow it'll be farther out. See? It's always moving farther out.
Does the infinite comprehend eternity?
Yes,
Or do you think
I think
probably the only one, maybe
the Son and
on
Spirit
the
do, I think.
level,
I think the Son and Spirit do.
Son and Spirit will. But
There are two beings that...
You claim you can't think on an infinite level, and I guess I have to stop it.
I can't. Listen, Clyde, when you try to think of timelessness and spacelessness, now I think you can go one step beyond the finite, partly. You can form partial concepts of the transcendence of time and space. But that ain't absolute. That's only ultimate. I think we can project a little beyond the finite. Because in imagination, we can transcend space and time. We can think back and forwards, and elsewhere, and elsewhen.
It isn't possible to negotiate the transcendental level.
No. We get a vague grasp of it.
It's
But so help me, Clyde, that's as far as we go. You try to think timeless and spaceless, and brother, you're going to still think on the ultimate level.
I'm not thinking about what I can think. I'm thinking about what he can. I know what I can think. I can just barely think a little in time and space.
Yeah. This is beyond us, I think.
But it's an eternal bug to me.
And you must know what the first source is there.
Of course, I can't think of God writing a 7-act play. And that's what he had. As far as we can tell from the book now, there are 7 acts.
Right.
And we can foresee the opening curtain very dimly. Very, very dimly. Of Act 7.
Yeah.
Now, boy, I think that's a tremendous insight for a thinking mortal to have.
Yeah.
But I don't believe for a minute that all of the stage and every piece of furniture on that stage isn't set and already in existence that God is in it. Therefore, to him, not to me, or to anyone between me and him, am I worried about. But in his context, there is a finite number of pieces of furniture on that stage.
At any given moment in time.
Well, just go shoot.
But the stage is a growing stage, Clyde.
Excuse me, you're good.
Finite to the limit of time that it would be asked for
Right.
to God. But it isn't finite in timelessness and space.
Now that's what
That's
I
right.
can't understand why Bill won't put us in the timeless and space.
Why?
And then we'll quit worrying about any finite numbers.
Let me read you this. While the domain of mathematics is beset with qualitative limitations, it does provide the finite mind with a conceptual basis of contemplating infinity. There is no quantitative limitation to numbers, even in the comprehension of the finite mind. No matter how large the number conceived, you can always envision one more being added. And also you can comprehend that that is short of infinity. Because no matter how many times you repeat this addition to numbers, still always one more can be added. At the same time, the infinite series can be totaled at any given point. And this total, more properly a subtotal, provides the fullness of the sweetness of goal attainment for a given person at a given time and status. But sooner or later, this same person begins to hunger and yearn for new and greater goals, and such adventures and growth will be forever forthcoming in the fullness of time and the cycles of eternity. So, let's take that when we explore it. We're going to start out adding numbers. And at any given moment, we can total it. But it's not the total of all number, is it?
No.
I'll rest my case.
Right. How far will parallel lines go if you were to take them to the limits of space?
I don't know. But remember, space itself is like this infinite series. It probably, too, is growth.
It would go to the limits of that finite level, which to be extended therefrom from as space would be extended.
And to me, the limit of space at any given moment is merely the subtotal, which you would take off at that given moment.
And you can go back the other way.
Yeah.
You can take half and half and half,
Sure.
but you'll never get there.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's the infinitesimal shift.
You come close, but you'll never get there.
These are hard things to grasp, and we must put them through tremendous distortion as we try to put these concepts of eternity into a time-bound mind. As we try to contemplate endlessness when we think in terms of space, and yet contemplate the alternative. If we have an attainable goal, then what comes after that? This is the end of growth.
The next goal.
Right. But if the final goal is attainable, no more goals. And to me, what we're looking at is not a frustrating thing. We're contemplating a dynamic situation of endless growth. And when you look at infinity, then no matter how old the universe is, it is forever young. And I've used this language trying to put down in English the feeling of real joy I get. It's like forever living in the fresh dawn of an eternal springtime. It's never going to be summer. It is forever springtime in the universe. Shoot.
I find it's not incompatible to go along with the statement that you make that sometime in a quintillion eons it is possible for us to recognize God as ultimate on a qualitative level. Never to exhaust.
You mean absolute?
Right, God is absolute.
Yes.
On a qualitative level.
Yeah.
Never to attain the quantitative fulfillment of that now. Here
But always to grow in quantity.
right, growing within.
Yeah.
Now, my point is this. Is it irrevocable that to grow in that concept where we'll never attain the fullness thereof, that you have additional physical positions from which to exert your efforts?
I don't know. I think it's a good way for us to look at it. What actually is going to be out there, Clyde, I wouldn't know. I think in terms of a physical expansion in space, whether I'm thinking factually or symbolically, Holy Toledo is bad enough to think out there at all.
Theoretically, in time, we're not limitless.
We're not what now?
I
Limitless.
said theoretically, if time were not limitless, then your goals would be limited.
Correct.
And your attainability on a quantitative nature of God would be limited.
Yes.
Period. Else there would be no more goals to attain. And this is an unattainable number.
Here's the way I've reconciled it in my thinking. Take planetary mortal epochs. There's 7 of them. Pre-planetary Prince Man, post-planetary Prince Man, post-Adamic Man, post-magisterial Sun Man, post-bestowal Sun, post-teacher Sun, the era of light and life. You've had it all over. Well, wait a minute. When you take a look at the era of light and life, you discover it's broken down into 7 stages. When When you take a look at the era of light and life, you discover it's broken down into 7 stages. Each one of which has a beginning, a duration, and a conclusion. and you move on till you get to the 7th stage of light and life. Now, if this book were written with sufficient fineness, I'll bet you a cookie that that 7th stage would be broken down into 7 sub-stages. So you would keep right on having a feeling of milestones in progress. Except the 7th sub-stage of the 7th stage of light and life doesn't happen to have an end, but in turn breaks down into sub-substages.
My point is exactly that. You can reenact that 10 jillion deals, but you still are talking, when you quit talking, about the planet Uranus. Okay.
Yeah.
The 7th stage, on your analogy, here we are on the planet Uranus. We get to the era of light and life, down in 7. You get to the 7th one there, and if you had defined it, that one's broken down in 7, but it's still what's happening here on this piece, on this planet. Cosmically, could it not be? I mean, do you find anything to refute such a concept? That they're cosmically can be linked to the material, not to the spiritual, intellectual.
There's no limit to personality, spiritual growth, nor to intellectual growth. There's a limit to physical metamorphosis.
I found that quote in it.
Yeah.
There is a limit to physical metamorphosis. Now you put two
It
connotations.
doesn't say to physical expansion,
No, it
though.
doesn't. I wish it had, but it didn't.
And it doesn't say that space potency is limited.
Bill, it doesn't say that that he necessarily has to utilize it.
Agreed. Yeah.
It tells us everything is circuited. Everything that begins at paradise, or with the first sourcing center, returns. It also tells us that there's no universe eternal but the central universe.
Past eternal. The others may be future eternal.
Well,
I think Orvanton is a future eternal.
I didn't get that connotation. It says there's no universe eternal but the central universe.
But that speaks in terms of past eternity. It's just like the Supreme and the Ultimate. They have historic origins, but they're spoken of as future eternal beings. I don't think the Supreme and the Ultimate will ever come to an end, although they have very distinct
No,
beginnings.
I don't think they'll come to an end either.
I don't think Orvanton will either.
Well, we know in time the sun is, or at least some of these planets is going to.
Yeah. But not after the 5th stage of light and life. They achieve physical equilibrium. And I think these suns are encircuited then. And they're feeding energy to balance the energy that's got. That sun won't burn out.
The papers tell us that.
Yeah. Whatever gets to the 5th era of light and life, that's going to be here. And that'll be here for a long time. Maybe forever. You see, look, we've got to be charitable with ourselves when we try to put into the language of time and space the concepts of infinity and eternity. And it's not a coward's way out. Confound it now, Clyde. I'm as bold as anybody you'll ever meet in speculating, but I don't take our words too seriously. Let's go back to our Bantu now. You're commissioned by the State Department to write a series of a forward and 196 chapters on the American way of life. And the Bantu that we're dealing with, their mathematics, consists of 4 symbols. 1, 2, 3, many. That's it. You've had it. You can do a little bit with many, many, much many, large many, big many, many, big many, many, many. But this is pure quality. You get no precision in quantity. And the 128th chapter that you've outlined is entitled "The Function of the New York Stock Exchange and Other Similar Trading Institutions as Economic Regulators of American Business." That's your title. And you start dictating. And the translator says, but no word in Bantu for common stock, cumulative, non-cumulative preferred, secured, unsecured debentures. No word in Bantu for exchange, money, and the like. And little by little, you begin recasting your presentation. And you either decide to present the concept of a county fair where people bring their produce and exchange on a barter basis, or you're going to scrap the whole damn chapter. Yeah. And that's a simple problem compared to what these people ran up against, I think. Trying to write this stuff in English. And that, to me, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be bold, speculate, but let's stop and consider. Let's reason by analogy. We have differentials of language on our planet that should make us very sympathetic with the language problems of this book, because the gap is greater. I have a feeling some of these concepts, if they started out in the tongue of Uversa, I'll bet a cookie they sustained a 90% loss when they went into the speech of Salvington, which they'd have to go. Then when they went from Salvington to Satania, probably another 90% loss. That's a 99% loss. And when they went from Satania into English, I think they sustained another 90% loss. So that what comes through is maybe 0.1% or less of the original concept as it was expounded in the tongue of Uversa. And you can't translate from Uversa into English. The two languages have nothing in common. You've got to go through these stages in order to reach English. The function of the New York Stock Exchange and other similar institutions acting as economic regulators of American business life. That's your chapter 8. 1, 2, 3, many.
Well, the concept of a county fair would be greater than 1.1% of that.
Sure. Sure.
The far in between.
Listen with humility. The best music of Urantia is just a fleeting echo of the magnificent strains heard with the celestial associates of your musicians, who left but snatches of these harmonies of Moracha forces on record as musical melodies of sound harmonics. Spirit Moracha music not infrequently employs all 7 modes of expression and reproduction, so that the human mind is tremendously handicapped in any attempt to reduce these melodies of the higher spheres to mere notes of musical sound. Such an effort would be something like endeavoring to reproduce the strains of a great orchestra by means of a single musical instrument. While you've assembled some beautiful melodies on Urantia, you have not progressed musically nearly so far as many of your neighboring planets in Satania. If Adam and Eve had only survived, then would you have had music in reality. But the gift of harmony so large in their natures has been so diluted by strains of unmusical tendencies that only once in 1,000 mortal lives is there any great appreciation of harmonics. But be not discouraged. Someday, a real musician may appear on Urantia, and whole people will be enthralled to the magnificent strains of his melodies. One such human being could forever change the course of a whole nation, even the entire civilized world. That's what they think of our music. Rocker, bro. The ability to translate thought into language in the Morontia and spirit spheres is beyond mortal comprehension. Our rate of reducing thought to a permanent record can be so speeded up by the expert recorders that the equivalent of over 500,000 words or thought symbols can be registered in 1 minute of Urantia time. These universe languages are far more replete than the speech of the evolving worlds. The concept symbols of Uversa embrace more than 1 billion characters, although the basic alphabet contains only 70 symbols. The language of Nebadon is not quite so elaborate, the basic symbols or alphabet being 48 in number. The oratory of the spirit world is one of the rare treats which await you who have heard only the crude and stumbling orations of Urantia. There is harmony of music and euphony of expression in the orations of Salvington and Edentia, which are inspiring beyond description. These burning concepts are like gems of beauty and diadems of glory. But I cannot do it. I cannot convey to the human mind the breadth and depth of these realities of another world. They're only talking about the Morontia level here, Clyde. He's exhausted the sensorium in talking about celestial artisans. He's used up all our sensory mechanisms, and then he gets to his final group. These artists, the harmony workers, are not concerned with music, painting, or anything similar, as you might be led to surmise. They are occupied with the manipulation and organization of specialized forces and energies which are present in the spirit world, but which are not recognized by mortals. If I had the least possible basis for comparison, I would attempt to portray this unique field of spirit achievement, but I despair. There is no hope of conveying to mortal minds this sphere of celestial artistry. Nevertheless, that which cannot be described may still be implied. Beauty, rhythm, and harmony are intellectually associated and spiritually akin. Truth, fact, and relationship are intellectually inseparable and associated with the philosophic concepts of beauty. Goodness, righteousness, and justice are philosophically interrelated and spiritually bound up together with living truth and divine beauty. Cosmic concepts of true philosophy, the portrayal of celestial artistry, or the mortal attempt to depict the human recognition of divine beauty can never be truly satisfying if such attempted creature progression is ununified. These expressions of the divine urge within the evolving creature may be intellectually true, emotionally beautiful, and spiritually good, but the real soul of expression is absent unless these realities of truth, meanings of beauty, and values of goodness are unified in the life experience of the artisan, the scientist, or the philosopher. These divine qualities are perfectly and absolutely unified in God, and every God-knowing man or angel possesses the potential of unlimited self-expression on ever-progressing levels of unified self-realization by the technique of the never-ending achievement of God-likeness, the experiential blending in the evolutionary experience of eternal truth, universal beauty, and divine goodness. That's a pretty good guy working in Bantu, isn't it? He just couldn't tell us what they do, so he talked about the values that are represented in what they're doing. You get that same thing when they portray the life, the personality of Jesus, in that wonderful section in Part 3 called The Acme of Religious Living, where they said it wasn't that the Master was so much in any one direction, as that there was a perfect symmetry of exquisite balance in his character. He was just not out of whack anymore. It was symmetrical. Now here they're talking not about infinity and eternity. Here they're talking about the celestial artisans. beings who are artists, if you please, beings who are working basically in the Morantia level. This paper is associated with the constellations, not with Havona. And if language breaks down in discussing the doings of the mid-Morantia phase of mortal ascent, how much more does it break down as we go still farther away and out into more distant countries? See, this is probably one of the last papers in which they really try to tell us the facts. Beyond that, I think they set truth, fact, and relationship are intellectually inseparable and associated with the philosophic concepts of beauty. Goodness, righteousness, and justice are philosophically interrelated and spiritually bound up together with living truth and divine beauty. Cosmic concepts of true philosophy, the portrayal of celestial artistry, or the mortal attempt to depict the human recognition of divine beauty can never be truly satisfying if such attempted creature progression is ununified. These expressions of the divine urge within the evolving creature may be intellectually true, emotionally beautiful, and spiritually good, but the real soul of expression is absent unless these realities of truth, meanings of beauty, and values of goodness are unified in the life experience of the artisan, the scientist, or the philosopher. These divine qualities are perfectly and absolutely unified in God, and every God-knowing man or angel possesses the potential of unlimited self-expression on ever-progressing levels of unified self-realization by the technique of the never-ending achievement of God-likeness, the experiential blending in the evolutionary experience of eternal truth, universal beauty, and divine goodness. That's a pretty good guy working in Bantu, isn't it? He just couldn't tell us what they do, so he talked about the values that are represented in what they're doing. You get that same thing when they portray the life, the personality of Jesus, in that wonderful section in Part 3 called The Acme of Religious Living, where they said that it wasn't that the master was so much in any one direction, as that there was a perfect symmetry of exquisite balance in his character. He was just not out of whack anywhere. It was symmetrical. Now here they're talking not about infinity and eternity. Here they're talking about the celestial artisans, beings who are artists, if you please, beings who are working basically in the Morantia level. This paper is associated with the constellations, not with Havona. And if language breaks down in discussing the doings of the mid-Morantia phase of mortal ascent, how much more does it break down as we go still farther away and out into more distant countries? See, this is probably one of the last papers in which they really try to tell us the facts. Beyond that, I think they settle for symbols. But here they made a real effort to tell us something about what these artisans do, because there are some points of comparison in the human sensory mechanism and in the impact which they have on the Morantia sensory mechanism. They tell us something about edentia, but not much about Salvington, do they? Still less about Uversa. How do you describe these worlds? They're beyond it. Now, on Jerusalem, yeah, they tell us a good deal, and I think it's pretty darn factual, because Jerusalem is a very material type sphere. Its permanent citizens would be visible to us if they were down here. They're Adam and Eve. It's got manufactures and so on.
It tells us, Bill, from the material to the spiritual, there's 570 steps, so
Yeah.
that you can draw a conclusion there.
So I'm not a coward, Clint. But this archangel, this arcane soul kind of gives up on us a little bit in talking about the celestial artisans. And so when we get out into the cosmos infinite, I think we're entitled to say, look, our semantics are getting spongy. Let's keep right on talking. But let's not be too serious about these words. Let's not be so sure that we got it all wrapped